Hello everyone, hope everyone is fine. This is Rashid Khan. Welcome to Innovative English Learning. You can also watch this video in Urdu from the playlist. Today we are going to talk about another very important topic, that is clause. So in this video we'll talk about clause, its definition, and we'll talk about some of the types of clause like independent or main clause, dependent clause, relative clause, noun clause, adjectival clause, and adverbial clause. Let's see what's a clause. Okay. A clause is a group of related words with a subject and main verb. Remember that it's a group of words with a subject and main verb. So that is the basic difference between a clause and a phrase, that in a phrase we may either have a subject or a verb but not both of them, while in a clause we have both of them, subject as well as main verb. Or it is a group of words with subject and predicate which forms part of a larger sentence. So again the same thing, we have a subject and predicate. Predicate is the sentence apart from subject is called predicate. So that is the structure, and it forms part of a larger sentence, and it is part of a larger sentence. For example, we have David is walking, Anna is taking rest. David is the subject, is walking the verb, again Anna subject, is talking verb, and rest is the object. So here we have two subjects and two verbs. It means that we have two clauses and we join them with the help of and in one larger sentence. So here we have two clauses and one sentence. In one sentence we have two clauses. One is David is walking and another is Anna is taking rest. So that is how we can identify clauses in a larger sentence. Now we have some types of clauses. We have some types of clause like independent or main clause, and we have dependent or subordinate clause. These are some of the major types, and we have some more types, relative and adverbial or adjectival clause. Let's discuss that what is dependent or independent clause. Now in independent or main or principal clause, we can call them independent, main or principal clause, is the type of clause that can stand by itself to give us complete meaning. Remember that an independent clause can come alone to give us complete meaning. A main clause has a finite verb, like finite verb is the one that shows the singularity or plurality of the subject or the tense of a verb. We use and, or, but, and so to join main clauses. These are some of the coordinating conjunctions. We use them to join two or more independent clauses. For example, I am walking, that is one clause. Ali is running, that is another clause, and we join them with the help of and. He is laughing, one clause. He is the subject, laughing is the verb, one clause. She is crying, another clause, and we join them with the help of but. It was late and I was tired. I was tired is one clause, and it was late another clause, and we join them with the help of and. So overall it's one sentence. Now what's the difference between a clause and a sentence? Normally, if for example a clause can stand by itself to give us complete meaning, then what's the difference between a clause and a sentence? An independent or main clause gives us complete meaning, while a sentence also gives complete meaning, but there is a slight difference between the two. A clause is part of a larger sentence. It does not come alone. Remember that a clause is part of a larger sentence. It is not a sentence itself. Okay, so it does not come alone. And if an independent clause occurs alone, we call it simple sentence rather than an independent clause. Remember that when we have an independent clause, single independent clause, we will call it a simple sentence rather than an independent clause. A sentence always begins with a capital letter and ends with a full stop. Remember that is the quality of a sentence, that it begins with a capital letter and ends with a full stop or a question mark or sign of exclamation. But that may not be the case with a clause. For example, he is laughing. He begins with capital and full stop at the end, so it's a simple sentence. But he is laughing because I am joking. So here he is laughing, the same clause, but it does not end with a full stop or question mark. Rather we have another clause attached to it. That is why here we will call it an independent clause rather than a simple sentence. We can use and to join two main clauses. Like and is a conjunction. For example, the man went up to the 86th floor and he jumped. So here and is used to join two independent clauses. In this case, when we join two independent clauses with coordinating conjunction, we call it coordinate clauses. When the subject is the same in both clauses, we can leave it out of the second one. For example, if we have two clauses and the subject is similar in both of them, we can remove or we can omit the subject from the second clause. For example, the man went up to the 86th floor and jumped. So here he refers to the same man, so we can omit he from this clause. What is dependent clause now? Dependent clause or subordinate clause is the type of clause that normally begins with a subordinating conjunction. If you recall, we have discussed all the subordinating conjunctions in our lecture on parts of speech. So the dependent clause begins with a subordinating conjunction and cannot stand by itself to give us complete meaning. Remember, that is the difference between dependent and independent, that independent clause can come alone to give us complete meaning, while dependent clause, it cannot come alone to give us complete meaning. It is always accompanied by an independent clause to complete its meaning. Remember, if we have 5 or 10 dependent clauses, they will not give us complete meaning until and unless we accompany it with another independent clause, or we accompany them with an independent clause. For example, if it rains, it is the subject and rain is the verb, so it is a clause. If it rains, if is the subordinating conjunction, so here it is a clause, but it does not give complete meaning. When you come, you is the subject, come is the verb, it is a clause, but it does not give me complete meaning. As he entered the room, again we have the subject and the verb, and it is a clause, but it does not give me complete meaning unless and until we put or we add an independent clause. For example, if it rains, we will stop the class. When you come, we will go for walk. As he entered the room, the students kept quiet. So now the sentence is completed, or the meaning is completed. Subordinating conjunctions are if, when, since, as, etc. We have relative clause, that is another very important type of clause. A clause is a part of a sentence, as you remember. A relative clause tells us which person or thing or what kind of person or thing the speaker means. Remember that a relative clause normally gives us more information about a subject. Okay, so for example, the man who lives next door. Which man? Who lives next door. Okay, people who live in Paris. So who live in Paris, that is the relative clause. Okay, we use who in a relative clause when we are talking about people. So when we talk about people, when we refer to people, we normally use who. For example, the man, he lives next door, is very friendly. So here he is replaced with who. The man who lives next door, this is the relative clause, is very friendly. Okay, we know a lot of people, they live in Boston. So we know a lot of people who live in Boston. Here who live in Boston, that is the relative clause. When we are talking about things, we use that, not who. But remember, when we refer to things, we replace it with that rather than who in a relative clause. For example, we use that instead of it or they. Where are the eggs? Now eggs, they are things, they were in the refrigerator. So where are the eggs that were in the refrigerator? I don't like stories that have unhappy endings. So stories is replaced with date. Jerry works for a company that makes typewriters. Okay, so Jerry works for a company, date. So that refers to the company. Everything that happened was my fault. Okay, so that refers to everything. You can also use which for things but not for people. We can also use which to refer to people. For example, where are the eggs which were in the refrigerator? Okay, but that is more usual than which. Relative clauses where we use whose, whom, or where. Whose, we use whose in a relative clause instead of his, her, and their. When we have possessive adjective or possessive pronouns, so we replace them with whose. For example, we saw some people, their car had broken down. We saw some people whose car had broken down. So we use whose mostly for people. A widow is a woman whose husband is dead. Her husband is dead. So her is replaced with whose. What's the name of the girl whose car you borrowed? So you borrowed her car. The other day I met someone whose brother I went to school with. Okay, so whose refers to someone. Using whom in relative clauses, sometimes we use whom in a relative clause. So whom is actually used instead of who when we refer to it as object. Remember that whom is the objective case of who. For example, the man whom I wanted to see. Here whom is referring to the object whom I wanted to see. I am the subject and whom I wanted to see was away on vacation. So I wanted to see him. Here whom is replacing him. You can also use whom with a preposition to, from, with whom, etc. For example, the woman with whom he fell in love left him after a few weeks. He fell in love with her. Okay, so with her is replaced with whom. We can also use where in a relative clause when we refer to places. For example, you can use where in a relative clause to talk about places, like the hotel we stayed there wasn't very clean. So the hotel where we stayed wasn't very clean. I recently went back to the town where I was born. I'd like to live in a country where there is plenty of sunshine. Okay, next we have a noun clause, a dependent clause that functions like a noun in the sentence and generally acts as the subject or verb of the object is known as a noun clause. Okay, so remember that a noun clause functions as a noun in a sentence and it acts as the subject of a verb or the object of a verb in a noun clause. For example, I think that you will like it. Here that you will like it is a relative clause and it's a noun clause and it refers or it modifies the meaning of think. Here the noun clause that you will like it acts as an object of the verb think. So here it functions as the object. Where she went is not known to anyone. Here the noun clause where she went acts as a subject of the verb is not known. So here this noun clause is functioning as the subject of this sentence or the following verb. Next we have adjective clause. An adjective clause is a dependent clause that acts as an adjective and hence qualifies a noun or pronoun in a sentence. Remember that the function of an adjective is that it qualifies the meaning of a noun or pronoun. So when there is a clause and that clause qualifies a noun or pronoun, that clause is supposed to be adjective clause or adjectival clause. For example, I used the notebook that had a red colored cover. So that had a red colored cover modifies the meaning of notebook. So here it functions as the adjective and thus it is an adjectival clause. The hat which was made of jute was my favorite. Again, which was made of jute, so it refers to the noun hat and thus it qualifies the meaning of hat and is functioning as the adjectival clause. Next we have adverb clause. An adverb clause is a dependent clause that does the job of an adverb. Now what is the function of an adverb? That it modifies the meaning of a verb, an adjective or another adverb in a sentence. Of course, adverbial clauses can be further classified according to the various kinds of adverb. Now an adverb may show the time or the place or the manner or the frequency of a verb, so accordingly we can classify them into different types. But overall, when a clause functions as the adverb in a sentence, we call it an adverb clause. For example, wait here till I come back. Till I come back shows the time of action wait here, so that is why we call it an adverb clause. Hope you have learned much about clauses in this video. For more such videos, subscribe our channel Innovative English Learning and keep watching it. Take care of yourself. Thank you.